All right, welcome everybody. My name is Nick Dreesen. I am the president and founder of Families United Action Network. And this election cycle, it's been a little bit more difficult to get out to the campaign trail as there haven't been as many of events. And normally we'd like to sit down with each candidate, have some coffee, have some time to go over the different family law reform issues. But due to COVID, it's made it a little bit harder. So this year we've sent out a candidate questionnaire and we've asked for video submissions. Some candidates have done that, and then a few have been gracious enough with their time to go ahead and join us for an interview. And today we have from running in House District 15, that's Iowa House District 15, is Sarah Abdouch. So Sarah, can you well, first off, welcome. And can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and the district you're running in?
Yeah, not a problem. The district I'm running in is the west end of Council Bluffs and Carter Lake, and it's a it's a pretty cool district, honestly. The people are really down to earth, and it's one of those things you get out there and talk to them, and they're kind of just your everyday Americans. So it's been a real treat to actually go door knocking and talk to people and just kind of get their feedback on what's going on. I've been involved in politics kind of in a volunteer basis for quite a while. And it's one of those things, it's never entirely exciting to put yourself out there as, a potential public official, just because, that it comes with a lot of trouble, especially in today's day and age where there's just so much vitriol associated with, you being with this party or that. But it was one of those things where I had the opportunity and things kind of lined up, and I was like, I have a skill set, I can offer it to this district, and, we'll try to see if we can go to the Iowa House and advance the cause of the people on the ground here.
Okay, wonderful. And do you have a website, or what is the easiest way for people that are looking to get a hold of you, whether they want to donate, learn more about you, or just reach out and talk with you more?
Yeah, absolutely. The easiest place is my website. It's abdouchforhouse.com. But I'm also on Facebook. I'm pretty responsive. If people just reach out, they can either message me privately or they can message me through my candidate page. Yeah, and I give out my cell phone number to people. So, cell phone, email, whatever works for people. That's what's up on my website. Feel free to reach out any way that is most comfortable for
Okay. And
you.
again, that was Abdouche for Iowa?
Abdouchforhouse.com.
Or Abdouche for Iowa, or for House. Okay, for House. Okay. And so again, the Families United Action Network does not endorse any candidates. This is just a chance to meet the candidates, ask them a few questions pertaining to family law reform. And with that, I'll go ahead and I'll get started. So we've sent you the questionnaire ahead of time. You had some time to look over it. I'm going to kind of just go at random with some of these questions. But before we get started, do you have any opening comments when dealing with family law reform, family division, family separation?
Yeah, it's I know it's a very difficult topic, and it's a topic that requires a pretty nuanced approach, I think, because anytime you're talking about the possibility of, say, separating children from their parents, that needs to be taken as a very, very weighty decision, and the factors that lead to it, and sort of how we handle that. Um, it needs to be a very, very careful position. And in general, too, I found that our legal system does not tend to treat children as equally a part of both the mother and the father. And I think that's one of the probably the biggest injustices that we see today, is that fathers are treated as lesser in their children's lives. And that's something that I think if we can't address that, we're going to continue to see pretty serious injustice in this area.
Okay. I'm very glad that you brought that up, because it does so many other psychological and mental emotions that we're passing off to those children too, even by saying that this one person is lesser than the other parent. Then they start to feel like parts of themselves can be inadequate as well, and so it's just a systemic problem that we keep pushing off. So
Yeah.
Now, we were dealing with the courts, they generally want to refer to the best interest of the child standard, but that is a standard that is not fully defined. And so we wanted to know, in your opinion, how would you define in the best interest of the child? And also, how would you define in the best interest of the family? And would there
Mhm.
be any differences, or how would they overlap?
Yeah. So I think I would probably answer that in a twofold way. So one of the principles that I think we need to kind of focus on is sort of um, your minimal touch, I guess. As little as is needed to be done is what we should do. We should not be going, from 0 to 100 on, separating children from their parents. It's just one of those things. It is something that we have to take at a very careful pace. And obviously, there are extenuating circumstances that where a child may need to be removed from a home immediately. But then what we need to focus on, I think, is stability, because children in general thrive on stability. They thrive on the known. So the very first thing then that Child Protective Services or DHS should be looking at is finding a place that that child already knows to put them. That means, close family members, maybe very close family friends, places like that. And I can kind of use a sort of personal example from this, and this was back in the 90s, but my cousin at the time, she was in kind of a bad spot. She was very young, and I was very young too, but her parents were into drugs, and it was just not a good situation. And then whenever Child Protective Services came in, they separated her from them, and they brought her to our home actually. My parents had, I think, 4 or 5 of us at the time, and so she lived with us for a little while her parents were sort of figuring themselves out and getting themselves together. And that had a good story because her mom ended up cleaning up and got her back, and she's grown up and thrived and really turned into a pretty remarkable young woman. But it was one of those things where being able to go to a home of people that she already kind of knew and sort of have that stability, I think really helped her with that transition. Obviously, the there were lasting issues related to the abuse that happened, but um, I think that was one of the major stepping stones for kind of moving her into a better place in her life overall. So I think that's sort of the approach that we should be taking anytime we do have to go with that drastic measure, is that we need to sort of focus on making sure that the best interest of the child tends to be in that stability. So making sure that we get them into a place that they sort of already know and are comfortable with.
Okay, so you said a lot in that. So stability would definitely be kind of the short answer that I got from that. And would you say that there is a difference between best interest of the family or best interest of the child, or does that all just kind of overplay or overlap? I mean.
I think there is a difference, because the one clearly focuses on maintaining the family unit as much as possible, and the other is much more about this nebulous idea of what is best for the child. Um, but what is best for the child is usually linked to family stability. I think there's nobody who would argue that the statistics don't bear out. Children in a stable two-parent home um, are in general much better off than children in a single parent home or a plethora of other circumstances. So as much as we can preserve that, we should be preserving that.
And you'd agree families come in all shapes and sizes, and you can't really define a family necessarily.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, yeah, families are defined by the people in them. It tends
Okay.
to be, whatever they recognize as their family is what we should be recognizing as their family too. And but again, it comes down to preserving that unit.
Okay. And something else I gathered from what you said, my analogy, I guess, I'm seeing our logo in the background, so a plant or a tree comes to mind, and the more that you try and transplant it, away from its original roots, is when the weaker it becomes. If there needs to be a transplant, then we still want to try and keep it in the familiar branch within that strong root system.
Yes.
Okay. So obviously the judicial system and the DHS, meaning Department of Human Services, or CPS, those are different divisions. Do you feel that there's adequate oversight, or would you be in favor of more oversight and accountability to judges and to those in charge of CPS, social workers, et cetera?
Um, I think that's a pretty easy answer. There's definitely not adequate oversight at this point, especially there aren't easy avenues um, for parents, especially if they feel that they've been wronged by the system, to address that wrong. Saying, well, you have legal recourse, you can go through the court system, is basically like saying, okay, so for the next 2 years, your life is going to be hell if you want your kid back, but we can take them away in a night. Um, that should never, ever happen. And it's just one of those things. We should be carefully watching this area. It's just, again, I've heard stories of abuse. I've seen it myself. I was homeschooled, and it's very well known that homeschooled families have been deliberately targeted by CPS in many places and at many times, for not any good reason, but mostly because there's just this automatic suspicion if your child is not in the public school system. And that's just something that we've had to deal with our entire lives. And I think it's incredibly wrong, because the government should never be punitive. It should never be something where because somebody believes something different than you, or behaves in a way that's different than you, you can kind of turn the government against them. So yes, I think that we should always be looking to improve our oversight, and also give people more avenues to address issues whenever they feel they've been wronged.
Okay. I would thank you for that answer very much. Now, obviously, there are situations where we do need a safety net. We do need somebody to step in and somebody to help that child who is in immediate danger at that very moment. The system claims that it does work towards reunification, and that it offers all these services. I would myself question if we provide as many services as we offer, or if we just kind of collect the money for the general funds there. But what situations would you say would be adequate for somebody to actually lose their parental rights?
I think the first and clearest scenario is any situation where a child is experiencing sexual abuse in the home, whether due to a parent or whether due to somebody that the parent is bringing into the home. I think that would be a scenario where if the parent is not um, paying attention to that and is putting their child in that situation, that would, to me, warrant automatic removal. And along that line, I would say, anytime we're seeing physical abuse that is damaging, I know we can kind of get into, questions about, sort of your corporal punishment, your spankings and things like that. And I think there's definitely a line there. But whenever I think we're talking, serious abuse where children are showing signs of it, they're showing injury. So that's another one. I think any other scenarios, probably drug abuse is another one where if the parents are neglecting the child because they can't, focus on the world around them because of kind of how much they're spending time using those drugs. That's another scenario, and that's again kind of the one that I would be most familiar with. So those three scenarios, I think, are the clearest and most obvious. And other than that, we'd have to have discussion about it.
Okay, and would you consider all of those just instantaneously, if there was sexual abuse, if there was drugs, that those rights would automatically be terminated, or would you see still a process to try and reunite that family and keep things together first?
Yeah, if the parent was the one responsible for, say, sexual abuse, then I would say automatically gone and never being put back. But if they brought a significant other into the home and that significant other was responsible for it, which is a very common scenario, then I would say if as long as that person is in that home, then the child should not be in that home. And then it's up to their parent whether or not they want to keep that person around, or if they prefer to keep their child. And that's probably one of the hardest scenarios to deal with. But in cases where there's drug abuse, I don't think it should be automatically all parental rights are gone. I do think that there should be a path for those parents to, clean up their act. I think the same thing actually if there's physical abuse, they can clean up their act and kind of demonstrate that they have turned a new leaf. I think it would be best for that child again to go back to their actual parents.
Okay. Now, in case you're just joining us, we are talking with House candidate from District 15, Sarah Abdouch. The website is Abdouch for House. Am I correct on that this time? Okay.
Yes.
Now, Sarah, what would you, or could you explain what you would do to, let me get into this one more time, sorry. Please explain what you would do to protect parental rights to maximize parenting time with both parents if elected.
Mhm. Yeah, so again, I think, and that was sort of something I hit on in my preface, is that I feel like our system right now does not adequately respect the rights of fathers. We have a system that currently heavily favors the mothers in these scenarios. And as much as possible, it really should be something where if the parents have split, then there is split custody between them and equal time. Now, obviously, that does not necessarily work out as cleanly and as easily as that. But it's one of those things. No parent, unless there are kind of the extenuating circumstances that we've already outlined, no parent should be able to block the other parent from access to the children, and no parent should be required to be present with the other parent unless, again, we're dealing with those extenuating circumstances, and those need to be clear. Too often, the system is used punitively between couples that are fighting with each other. And again, because it does tend to favor mothers over fathers, you see that this comes down very heavily on the men a lot. And typically they're landed with very expensive childcare bills where they're paying for the child. And then they're also, maybe they have weekend custody or something like that, but they don't get paid for that time. So they tend to take sort of the brunt of the punishment in these because that system is used very punitively often. And that's one of the things that I think if we addressed that and tried to make sure that our system was as equitable as possible toward both the man and the woman, I think that would be ideal.
Okay, now you mentioned the word equitable. Do you feel that there is monetary value that is getting in the way that it kind of keeps things the way that it currently is, whether through the legal system or anything else that you might be aware of in what your experience?
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's a very difficult industry, and it kind of ties in. It's not just in the area of children, but it also kind of ties into the area of marriage and divorce and sort of all of these family questions. I definitely think that there is incentive out there to sort of keep these things in sort of in flux for as long as possible. Honestly, the fact that it takes so long to go through court and it's so expensive, I really don't see why that should be. We really do need to focus on providing those services where we're saying, okay, first of all, I think we should, whenever a couple is planning to split, I think kind of encouraging more of that remediation is very important, and it's not necessarily something that the state can do. I think that's one of the issues that makes this area so difficult to address actually with just pure governmental discussions, is because it's an area of people, it's an area where we're talking about people who live in communities, who go to their churches. And if government's going to be doing anything, they really need to be taking all of those things into account as well. And government is very bad at that. So it's one of those things. I think the whole system does create a lot of unnecessary stress. It creates a lot of iniquity, as we already have discussed. And it is very expensive. And oftentimes you'll end up with, people ending up bankrupt, losing homes through the process. And it's just not right. Because if we're talking about in the best interest of the children, I think it's very clear that that's not in the best interest of the children.
You just took one of my lines away from me. I was just going to ask which part of that, the losing the house, the stress, the time away, all of that, which part of that is in the best interest of the child? And I think we all know the answer that it's not.
Yeah.
Now, would you say that based on what your experiences with all of this, that a parent that is fit to have their children on the weekend, if they're willing and wanting and they have that house, is there any reason that they're not able to? If they're fit on the weekends, aren't they a fit parent all the time?
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty easy thing. Typically, when we're talking about, split custody, it usually has more to do with work schedules and things like that. But again, it should be more based around not just, okay, you have this set schedule and I have this set schedule, but it should be more of a, okay, I've had the children, I want to make sure that you have time as well, and making sure that everyone has sort of equal time with them. The problem is in that I think where a lot of people sort of complicate this a lot is then you're moving the children around. And what if, say, they live in one school district over here and one school district over there? And that's not an easy answer. There isn't an easy answer to that. But the fact is it is in the best interest of the children to have both parents in their life. And we shouldn't just automatically write one parent off because, well, it's easier for us to deal with it that way. If the parents are concerned about their children, what they probably should do is something where the parents are the ones switching out, where they have a family home, where the parents are the ones who are coming in and out if they truly cannot make anything work. And I think that's the best option, where, we're adults and we need to take responsibility for our kids. And at some point, we need to be able to set our personal feelings aside and say, even if it's hard, I am gonna make sure we have a household for the kids. And even if we're not, doing that as a married couple, if we're just doing that as cohabitating couple, it's one of those things. It's not easy, and I don't think anybody's going to say that it's easy. But as much as possible, we need to be encouraging adults to be adults and say, you've brought these children into the world. They are your responsibility. And if you want them to have the best life, this is what we know is best for them. So, make of that what you will. You are also adults and you get to make your own decisions, but these are the options and the ways that you can think about this, that may work for you.
Yeah.
And that might also be a good place for those agencies to come in, where they say, instead of, we're here to sort of mediate how the children are split up, they could instead be like, what, in our role as mediator, we want to give you the options. These are things that might work for you. This is counseling that you can go through together. Even if you're not interested in each other romantically anymore, these are ways that you could be good parents together. And I think focusing on that aspect rather than just the question of, how are we going to split the kids up is I think a much better use of time.
I personally would agree with you, and this interview is about you, not about me, but I know that that's kind of similar to the experience that I had, that we agreed on the custody arrangements at first, but the court was not willing to sign off on 50-50, and then that grew the animosity between both of us. And so 4 years later, somebody that was once your best friend, that you're bringing up all the secrets to use as a weapon now, And it doesn't need to be that way. Fast forward in time, we do still do 50-50, even though that's not what we have on paper. We've learned to get along as friends. We are at every game together. The worst problem is when I go out of town, I find out she sneaks into my hot tub sometimes. So if that's the worst it's going to be now, then I can deal with that. And I guess that's kind of my message out there to everybody else, is it doesn't need to be a war. You don't need to feed the animal that says that you have to be fighting for every little bit. You can learn to communicate and to negotiate and to compromise. Those are the compromise and negotiate are two terms that I think have fallen by the wayside in the American society in the last couple of years that we need to return to for everybody's sake and for everybody's family. Shifting gears just a little bit here, when dealing with the Department of Human Services, with the Child Protective Services, would you be for or against an audit to see, especially where the money is going? Are we maximizing the use and where the workers are going, et cetera?
Yeah, in general, I think that's something that should be happening all the time, actually. Regular audits of all the government agencies should be occurring, and we should be putting in plain language what the expenditures are. I think that's actually one of the things whenever we do these audits, it still kind of turns into this miasma that's very hard for sort of your ordinary citizen to penetrate. So that's definitely something that I support. And also, I think it needs to be something where we have a, a method to cut whenever we do find waste. One of the biggest problems is that, and this is kind of generally across government agencies, is that they have an incentive to spend their entire budget because otherwise they will get cut next year. But I think wasteful spending needs to be identified as well, and cuts need to be made according to those as much as if they didn't spend their budget at all. I think there's always kind of that incentive to continue to gain as many funds as possible, but we need to have sort of regular cuts and regular shifting to keep things lean. I mean, I work in the private sector, and we have typically a round of layoffs every single year because you can't compete out there with, with I guess sort of that extra fat on the muscles. You need to keep it lean, you need to keep it nice and trim, and you need to kind of make sure that everyone's always working as if their job depends on it. And I think that's something that government agencies should not be exempt from. So I definitely recommend that.
Do you feel that the Department of Human Services or just government as a whole may have gotten caught in that money chasing game more in the business of it, and forgot the Department of Human Services forgot a little bit about human services and actually both the human part and providing services?
Yeah, and again, that's kind of one of the things that I talked about a little bit earlier, is this idea of depending on the government anyway to sort of be that human touch is not necessarily something that I would recommend, because at the end, government it's going to be a bureaucracy, and it's always going to be kind of the most difficult thing for people to deal with. I think that's one of the reasons why I would be encouraging, rather than just relying on government agencies, I would be encouraging those agencies to have to rely on other non-governmental entities in their areas, the sort of your local groups, your homeless shelters, your food pantries, your churches, those things out there that are sort of good at handling that human aspect of things, that are out there counseling, that are out there sort of knowing the needs of the families that sort of come through their doors. And that's really what DHS should be sort of leaning on and relying on. And I think if they did that, then it would also lead to better outcomes overall, if they weren't just sort of the arbiters that step in separate from everything, and sort of take over the scene. So yeah, it's one of those things. It's I'm in general just very much sort of small government, keep it as small as possible, and sort of keep things as local as possible, because we know our neighbors much better than any agency in Des Moines ever will.
Okay. Now, I think you've kind of already answered the next question a couple different times. So, should a child have access to both parents as long as both parents are fit, willing, and able? I believe that that was a yes.
Yes.
Now, this one was not on there, but before I go into the next question, do you feel that under the current model where we have pretty much a standard every other weekend and Wednesdays for most couples, unless they have the agreement themselves, do you feel that we currently have a cookie cutter model, or the model that we're presenting, which one would you say feels more like a cookie cutter model?
Yeah, I don't think that, yeah, it, if there's one thing that's very certain, it's that not everybody's lives are the same. And in fact, if you just go from one household to the next house beside them, they're probably going to be leading lives so very different that that you really couldn't make sense of it. So I think what you just described is the definition of cookie cutter. It's, this is what everybody does, so this is what you should do too. And again, I just don't think that that's the right approach. It should be something where, we're handling a family. They need to be treated as an individual family. Their circumstances need to be taken into account. And, I think that probably the thing that somebody working at DHS would say is, well, that takes a lot of time and takes a lot of money.
Okay.
Um, you know,
So, in regards to the bill that we presented, it's formally been known for the last few years as Senate File 571. There was a House number this last year, but I do not remember it off the top of my head. But did you have time to look at the language of that bill?
Are we talking about the bill to sort of separate CPS and?
No, the other one, the shared parenting bill. A
Oh,
rebuttable presumption of shared parenting with clear and convincing evidence.
gotcha. Yes. I didn't get to look at the language very deeply. I just kind of, skimmed through it. But yeah, again, it's sort of anything that we're going to be pushing towards that goal, I think is admirable. It was definitely something whenever I read through it initially, it wasn't something that I was against, if that makes sense.
Okay. And of course, you can be supportive of an idea, but completely against a bill because the devils are in the details. And that's why we want to make sure that we're having these conversations also ahead of time. To set the premise up for that bill, I was going to play this a little bit earlier, but she's kind of taken away a lot of the exactly what I was going to say. Now, Sarah, I've done this part twice. One time it worked perfectly and the other person was able to hear everything just fine. The other time they could not hear anything. So if you can't hear for just a second, I'll come right back to you and tell you what we watched, and I will get it to you afterwards to make sure that I'm not pulling any fast ones on you here.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Roseanne Linhart-Plant, and I'm an attorney and an active member of the Fawn Lobbying Committee. And today I want to tell you a little bit about the bill that we'll be sponsoring. When a marriage ends, the relationship ends, but the relationship with the children does not. What our bill attempts to do is level a playing field that right now is not level for both parents. The most important thing about our bill is the fact we're introducing something called a rebuttable presumption. So, what does that mean? Well, that means currently when a husband and a wife go to court and they're divorced, one party is declared the winner, the best parent. And it's by a preponderance of the evidence, and it's up to the judge. What we want is to make sure that the Iowa law is clearly followed in the fact that it is in the best interest of the children. What we want is to strengthen Iowa families. We want children to come out of a divorce not scathed. What happens are these children, they can suffer lifelong effects from this, and that is not healthy for our Iowa families or the future of Iowa. It's the highest form of scrutiny when the Supreme Court looks at it, which means that it has to be clear and convincing evidence. But in Iowa, when we look at who is the best parent, it's a preponderance. It's a much, much lower standard. With our bill, not only would we have the rebuttable presumption, but judges would have to look at clear and convincing evidence why that parent should not have shared parenting. Gone would be the days of mudslinging in court. Not only would this be better for the parties, the court system, and the children, but it would save money in the court system, move cases along more quickly, and make divorces far less contentious.
Okay, were you able to hear that?
No, I was not able
No.
to.
Okay. So that kind of explained the details of that bill real quick. And again, I will send that to you separately because we're going to need to edit it in to make sure that everybody can hear it. But this bill, it's not too much of a change at all. It's just that we're going to presume that you made the child together. Therefore, we're going to presume that you're both equal on the same page and that you're going to divide that child equally. Now, if either party has a problem with that and they want to dispute that, they can rebut that presumption. It can even be, I don't like the shoes that that person wears. And that's enough that we would hope an ethical attorney would stop that person from that excuse, and that a judge would hopefully definitely stop the frivolous cases there and still resort back to that equal presumption. But if we have something where we have sex abuse, drugs, or any distance, any of these things where there would need to be other arrangements, again, we would hope people would be adults and they would come up to those decisions themselves. But when there is still the fight that is going on, that instead of just having a preponderance of evidence and whoever can write the best affidavits, that we actually have clear and convincing evidence to prove that there is reasons to grounds to take anything other than equal.
Yes.
That you
Yeah,
would support that.
I would definitely support that. Yes.
Okay, so that is going to be a big one that we are going to be pushing. I'll tell you a little bit about that one. We've been pushing it for a number of years. We have never failed a vote. I believe it's 13 times that we've had a vote, and it only takes 6 votes to end up on the governor's desk, but we just failed to get scheduled all the time. And this year, I was sure this was the year, and then what do you know? It took a pandemic to stop up, but we still haven't stopped. We're still going to keep trying to fight for the children and families of Iowa. Now, you had mentioned the other bill. That is the bill that is to, we had it sponsored in the Senate last year by Senator Mark Sagabart and in the House by Representative Jeff Shipley. It is to do what we mentioned earlier about separating the Iowa Child Protective Services away, much like they did with the Department of Correction facilities a number of years ago back in the 80s. This would make it its own entity, which we're not about, expanding more government, but this would, the idea behind it is to ensure that the funds do not get lost in the general fund, that they are actually going to families and to services to reunite and to keep those family roots strong. So again, that's a deep bill. It's a 30-some page bill. I'm not expecting that you've read all of that one right now, but just based on the general idea of that, is that something that you believe that you would be supportive of and would be interested in reviewing the rest of the details?
Yeah, I would be very interested in the details. It's one of those things, I think that sort of the reasoning of, we want to make sure that the funding is actually going to the kids and the families that are, struggling, that unfortunately we have to intervene with. I think it's definitely a pretty good argument for separating those two things. I also think that there's probably a sort of there's other benefits that may come from that as well. And like you said, I'm not super interested in expanding government and kind of giving us more agencies to deal with when it seems like so many of them are already fairly poorly managed. But whenever you're dealing with such a sensitive subject, I think that it kind of does make sense to have a standalone agency that is more focused on that and hopefully is fairly separated from the rest of the government and sort of the sort of personalities that can come into play anytime you're talking about the rest of the bureaucracy. So I think that may be something, and I would want to look into it some more. But if it is something that would be better for the parents and the kids that are in these situations, then I definitely think that it would be something that we should pursue.
Okay, well, thank you very much for those answers, and we will be, circling back with you after the campaign one way or another on all of these issues. We have just a couple more questions, and we'll, again, thank you for taking the time with us. Now, when on either side of these issues, there's can be child support at play, and we're definitely not advocating for parents not to take care of their children. And we can have a whole different conversation on the child support issues. A lot of those are more of a federal issue anyway. But on a state level, do you feel that we should be taking driver's license and professional license for unpaid child support? And is that helping or hurting the problem?
No, and I understand the reason why that's being done, and it's, I think, just to create sort of a punitive payback, I guess, in a way. But I don't necessarily think that that's the appropriate response. Now, if we have to do wage garnishment in those extreme cases and things like that, that is probably a better option. But especially, we should not be taking away the means to work from the parent that is behind on child support. And I think if they are behind on child support, there definitely needs to be a review if there are extenuating circumstances, if they have been falling on hard times themselves, or even if they have a family that they're also trying to take care of. That is something that will often happen where they're trying to pay for a child over here and take care of these children over there. And oftentimes we see that the child support is frequently in kind of an unreasonable amount, or it can also be paired with, in a lot of cases, alimony. So say a father who has been divorced may be supporting both his wife and several children as well. And then if he ever tries to remarry and have a different family, then that's something that's going to continue to come out of his pocket. So it's, again, I can't state this enough. It's a very difficult area, and we know that it's a difficult area. And I think that's one of the reasons too why we should be pursuing as much as possible where two parents are fit and able. We should be pushing for split custody rather than, one parent paying the other parent to take care of the kids. I think it just makes a lot more sense for the parents to be splitting those responsibilities and giving time rather than money. And that way we don't have necessarily this sort of specter of who pays the child support looming over their heads as well. I just don't think that should be, something that sort of dogs people's tracks for their entire lives.
Yeah, and as a person of success, would you say that you've gotten there more through the deterrence and the potential consequences, or more through encouragement?
That's a good question. I mean, honestly, it's one of those things. Probably early on, it was deterrence. Whenever you're a kid, there's definitely that. Oh, if I do that, I'm gonna get in trouble. But your parents work hard to instill good values in you, and I think that kind of takes root whenever you're older, and it becomes much less about the deterrent as opposed to the just the we're adults. We want to do the right thing. We want to be good people. We want to pursue sort of a better version of ourselves every day. And I think any responsible adult kind of fall in that bucket. So it's much less about deterrence and much more about sort of what we can pursue positively.
Yeah, and as you said, if we take away that ability to work, then we are oftentimes causing many other problems at the same time while trying to deter from this one problem. And there's several reasons why somebody can get behind. So that is the main part of our questionnaire. One last one, I guess. What importance, if any, do you feel these stable? Let me start this over. What importance do you feel a stable family environment has on other facets of society, such as the economy, the environment, foreign policy, etc.?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that you can't understate the importance of a stable family. It, you just can't. It leads to everything else, because whenever you have a stable home, you have fewer drug problems. You have fewer people going into the system. You have fewer people engaging in risky behaviors. And it's not necessarily a recipe for perfection. I don't think anybody would say that. But in general, the statistics bear this out. So if we're talking about any of these other issues, it always starts in the home. That's something that I think is, again, it's very self-evident. You see, and it's not to bash on anybody who's trying to raise kids as best they can. Obviously, you have to do what you can with whatever you've got. And the world is complicated and there's a lot of situations out there. But as much as we possibly can, we really do need to be encouraging sort of that two-parent household where we have the kids growing up in stability and sort of with that day-to-day that they know is coming. And if we do that, in general, I think society's ills are greatly decreased. Again, not perfect, but much better.
Okay, well, thank you, Sarah. Again, this is Sarah Abdouch. She is running for Iowa House District 15. The website is Abdouch for House. Is that FOR or the number 4?
FOR.
Okay, so that is ABDOUCHFOR. HOUSE. I forgot I was going to say for Iowa again. So again, Abdouch for House. And again, we thank you very much for your time. In relationship to your campaign, it's kind of, just a couple weeks away. At this point in the game, what do you personally think that you and your campaign need to help with? Is it more funds, volunteers, exposure? Again, we do not make endorsements. We're just asking the questions.
Yeah, I think exposure is always the issue whenever you're talking about somebody going up against an incumbent. People in general are usually much more drawn to sort of what they already know, and that's just a part of human nature. So to say, hey, we can offer something much better. We can offer better than the status quo. It's something that we're trying to make sure we get that message out to people. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I do know that I'm very good at listening and I'm very good at taking a lot of things into account before I make any decisions. And it's one of those things I am very dedicated to representing the area that I am in rather than, all these different interest groups that kind of come at you. And that's one of the things that was most interesting about this interview particularly, is that what you guys are representing is a story that I have heard on the ground here. I've heard this from young men. I've heard it from older women. I've heard it across the board of people who are in these situations where their family was going through something, or they know a family member who is having an issue in this area. It's something that touches all of us, and so it's definitely something that I would want to pursue better for the people in my district. Again, it's just one of those things. We're kind of pulled, I think, in a lot of different directions. Everyone wants our opinion on a million different things. And one of the commitments that I have made is that whatever I'm pursuing, it is going to be something that is directly related to things I've heard from my constituents, the things that they are dealing with today. And we're not just going to let those things sit on the side while we're, pursuing this over here or that over there, because, some lobbyist in Des Moines told me that it was a really good idea to do that and promised me, a nice campaign donation at some point if I did. It's just one of those things. So that, I think, is the message that I want to get out more than anything. And that sort of exposure is probably the biggest hurdle that we're still working on. I'm trying to get out every afternoon and talk to people and just let them know why I'm running, because whenever people hear that, they are interested and they are excited, and they are, looking forward to seeing the future that we can create for this area.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I got to say, I admire the bravery of anybody who steps up to run and to help improve the world, especially for the reasons that you just listed, and especially in a time when the world is in the state that the world is in currently. So we appreciate your bravery, and we wish you the best of luck on everything. Now, for those who wish to find out more about her, again, that's Sarah Abdouch for House. Those who wish to find out more about us can go to familiesunite.org. Currently, we have up our 2020 legislative recommendations that you can click on any one of these and it will bring you to the verbiage that we are proposing and who supports them, etc. That will be updated within the next few months to our 2021 priorities. And if you wish to donate, you can help us out here and sign up for our newsletter and other ways to get involved. So again, that's familiesunite.org. Sarah, again, we thank you very much for this conversation, for you taking your time out and for what you're doing for children and families of Iowa. Do you have any final closing comments that you would like to leave us with?
I think I already kind of gave my closing pitch, I just really appreciate what you guys are doing. We really need groups like yours to kind of be advancing those these sorts of issues every day. And like you said, you've been pushing this every single legislative session without fail. And that's one of those things, nothing changes overnight, and you can't promise change overnight, but it's just moving that ball forward that is the most important thing. And I think that's very admirable that there are people like you guys out there doing this. So thank you, and thank you to all the people who are watching this, who've taken the time and are really considering this election and what may come of it. You guys are, I think emblematic of the best sort of Americans.
Well, on that note, I think that's a perfect spot to cut off right there. You definitely got me blushing right there. So, Sarah, again, thank you so much for your time. That's Sarah Abdouch for House, and we are Fawn at familiesunite.org. Thank you again, and thank you, everybody. We appreciate you. We love you. Have a great evening.